In these works, everyday landscapes and common objects are colorfully transformed to express our most human feelings and longings. Drawn from an outsider's perception of the Midwest, her paintings capture its strange, fragile beauty. How we relate to where we live and how it relates to us are her recurrent themes. In this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Suzanne Keith Loechl.
Hi, welcome to Art Now, a program where we talk to artists whose work is part of our community. I'm Pat Salmon, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Suzanne Keith Loechl. Suzanne graduated from Virginia Polytechnic and State University in 1987 with a bachelor's in landscape architecture and an art minor. She earned a Master of Landscape Architecture degree from the University of Illinois in 1994. Her work is part of the permanent collections of the Illinois Art Institute and Indiana State University. It also appears on the walls of the Loechl Cancer Center in Lowell, Massachusetts, and the Mills Breast Cancer Institute here in Urbana. Suzanne, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. First question I'd like to ask is simply how you got started creating art.
Well, I have always loved art, even as a child. My mom's an artist, and so she had done watercolors when I was little. And I remember, painting a bird when I was very young that I was very proud of, and kept in my room, and I just kept painting. I didn't do a lot in high school, and I love the outdoors. That was my second love. I went to college at Virginia Tech to study forestry, and that lasted one semester because organic chemistry came up. And oops. I didn't even try. I dropped it for a drawing class. Yeah. And then I decided the best thing that I could do with my interest was I discovered landscape architecture. So that was art and the outdoors, which was at the time a very good balance for me. And I got a minor in art, so I just continued taking drawing classes and painting classes, and that's how I started. Very good.
A lot of your work seems to capture Midwestern scenes, yet I know you were originally born in England and moved here as a child. Do you think that coming here as an outsider influences how you view the Midwest?
Yeah, definitely. I only came here for 2 years when I first got here. And I was studying landscape architecture, and coming here, I lived in Kansas for a while, so I had been in an open, flat landscape before. But my roots are, even though I moved from England when I was 4, that's in my blood. I just know it. I know that countryside. I just came back from there. And and Virginia, too, is a very rolling, sort of windy landscape. And so when I came here, and I'm very influenced by the place that I'm in, and it took some getting used to coming back to the flatlands again. And so I tried to develop a relationship with it, basically, when I came here. Yeah. In more ways than one.
Now, I know some of your work centers on landscapes. How do you think your training in landscape architecture affects your work?
Well, I said in more ways than one, because my landscape architecture training definitely taught me how to look spatially at the landscape. Look at the landscape with many different perspectives. One, just purely aesthetic. Another, more of a natural, environmental perception of the landscape. And also more of a cultural perception, how people interact in the landscape, how we live in the landscape, how the landscape is modified and changed as people are in it. And I think that's reflected in my painting, especially my early ones, when I physically rub away, and I can talk about that a little bit later, and sand it down and do different layers in the work. Also, another thing that's important that kind of goes back to how I developed an attachment to this landscape is that my master's thesis project was on women pioneers who moved to the Midwest and their perceptions of the prairie landscape, because there were no photographs, there were no paintings, there was nothing to tell us what the prairie looked like. And so I read diaries and letters and to understand how a pioneer farmer versus a romantic writer perceived this landscape. So I was, visually through my art developing a relationship with the landscape, but also through my research.
Sure. That's interesting. I think we'll see as we go on that definitely relates to your work. On your website, you divide your paintings into the categories of earth, spirit, and body. These kind of represent a progression over time in your work. Can you say more about how those progressed? And I know you have some examples.
Yeah, there's a piece up right now called A Plain Land. This is one of my earlier pieces that I did as I was trying to, I have to be honest, I came here for 2 years for my degree, and I didn't really want to stay here for the rest of my life. I think I'm the same as a lot of people. And so when I realized that was more, that was what was happening with my job and my husband's job, I decided, I made a conscious effort to go out there and find beauty in this place. In an artistic way. And so this landscape is one that, in the middle of the day, on a summer day, it could look really kind of drab and boring. But you may see the same landscape on a day like this when the snow is melting in March and the mist is rising, and see more beauty than you would see in the Colorado Rockies. It's an abstraction that has really become part of my aesthetic. And I framed my first paintings in gold, and I did that just really for myself to say this is a precious place. And then the technique I used was, like I said before, one of painting layers of different colors, usually starting with red and then scraping it and rubbing away and layering again, just like the landscape is created by humans or others. So. So the next series is my spirit series, which is a few years later I decided I wanted to introduce the figure into my paintings, and so I see these as reflecting the earth, the body, and the spirit without actually having the body in the piece. These pieces really relate to the elements of the landscape and the wind blowing, the light, the cultural elements, the roads or not, and how that evokes certain emotions within our human condition. And the paintings, whether the wind is blowing or where there's no wind at all, when there's no wind at all, you can see other paintings on my website. They almost look ghostly. Some of them do anyway, but at the time I wasn't painting the figure, but this was just, I'm still doing these, by the way, but this was just another step along my process of kind of looking at how humans sort of interact in the landscape. The other thing is just the very fact that clotheslines aren't in vogue anymore. In fact, a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of the newer neighborhoods in our country ban clotheslines. They're not allowed because they're messy and they're which I think is ridiculous in this era of environmental consciousness, but that's just another level. And then the line itself, the fact that these are attached to the line and at the mercy of the elements, I find very interesting too. So, and then my next series is the body series, which is almost the antithesis of the first paintings that you see. The first ones, the landscape ones, the earth ones, had really nothing that really, well, you can see the human marks on the land if you see fields and things like that, but I didn't put any structures or people or any other human elements in those paintings. This, I've almost turned that on its head. Now I've actually put the people in, and I'm studying landscapes that have absolutely no natural features in it at all, except the human beings themselves. And a lot of the times I use children. And this is, the reason I started this was becoming a mother and observing the American landscape, bringing back my landscape architecture as it is now. Especially in the suburbs of, I go to DC a lot because my family's there, and you go to Chicago, it's the same landscape. You go to LA, it's the same landscape, and we all know that walnuts everywhere. And our children are growing up in this. Our children, a lot of children are growing up without a connection to the natural world in their day-to-day lives. And I'm not criticizing that necessarily, I'm just observing it. And those are the three bodies of work. And now I'm going to go and go ahead.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
okay. No, that's all right. I was just going to say we're going to start by looking at some of your paintings from the Earth group. You state on your website that the Middle West can seem infinite. It's as maddening as it is beautiful. And I think you've said a little bit about that, but would you like to say anything additional?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of artists and writers of the past that have written about vast expanses of space. It could be the flatlands of this country or the sea, can cause you to feel like there's nothing protecting me. You feel very exposed. And I think I felt like that when I first moved here too. I felt like it was almost too exposed for me to feel comfortable. So in a way that was maddening, but also, in the summertime when the corn is high, you can't see anything.
Right, yes.
So where's the in-between? Yes, you see the swales, and but that's another thing. I'm driving down the same county roads and where I could see, you can put Manhattan and the view that you see in the winter, but you can't see anything. And it's fascinating, but it could be maddening. But it's beautiful because of what I had talked about before. At different times of day or different times of year, if you're looking for it, at different types of weather, and the storms are magnificent. It's truly incredible, like I had said before.
I would agree. Well, let's look at just a few of these. This one is Middle West Autumn. I don't know if you want to make comments, it's fine, or we can.
Well, this one does reflect some elements in my earlier pieces where I do show either fields or rows going off into into the horizon and go on and on. The next one actually is not exactly like that. I do put the trees in there. This is a small piece, and I'm very interested in just the kind of the simplicity of the landscape in a piece like this. The sky, the trees, and the fields. Right. Just a very simple beauty where the brush strokes themselves, I hope, or kind of create the mood of the painting.
Yeah, this one's called White Sky.
White Sky.
Yeah.
This next one is a more recent one where I have actually put some trees and reflections of trees in them. My flat landscapes, like I said, there's a lot more on the website, but I wanted to show some of the recent pieces where I wanted to put a little bit more graphic in there and a little bit more of the closer views of the landscape.
Okay.
This one's called Middle Ground, Middle West 2, and I have a whole series of this Middle Ground, Middle West. There's one back there, and then this other one's is a very new one, and it's quite different from some of my others, where I'm using this process of layering. I start with a bright red on the bottom, and I layer, and I look for elements within the landscape that are interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay. The next group of paintings we're going to look at are in the Spirit group, and there's a visual theme that runs through these paintings that is of the clothing on the clothesline, and I think you've used that very effectively to express deep emotions and our frailty. What inspired you to use that theme?
Well, it's funny what inspires an artist to use a particular theme. There were a couple of things. One was I was in a class a long time ago where my teacher, Jenny Southland, who is probably, I think she's still teaching around here, one of the first classes, she gave us a stack of magazines, and we just ripped out whatever image we thought was compelling. And so I kept this stack of of images for years, but one of the images was this wonderful photograph of laundry just blowing wildly in the breeze, and it just evoked something in me, a real nostalgia. I mean, my mother used to hang clothes out, and I do. And in England, they still do. I was just at my cousin's. She's my age. She doesn't even have a dryer, and it rains all the time, so it's pretty amazing. But it was the emotion within this particular image that was really interesting to me. And then I found another old photograph, a very old one, of clothing, and I just started, it was after I had a landscape show. I think the next morning I just started to work on these new pieces, and it really took off from there. I realized the depth of meaning within this imagery. I mean, I have this idea to hang a laundry line out. I keep talking about this, one of these days I'll do it, but I'd love to hang one out in the fields somewhere where you can see forever in the winter, and not at all in the summer, but
Yes.
but a line of clothing that would be out for a full year.
Yeah.
And then have a show where I'd record it somehow or another through film and photograph and paintings, and have the clothes in the exhibit all tattered and torn from the
Yeah, I think that would be
elements.
interesting.
Yeah, one of these days I'm going to do that. Yeah.
Okay, well, this first one we're looking at is She Held Up.
And I mean, there's nothing particular I can say about it because I've said so much about
Sure.
the pieces themselves. It's not a particular she. I just, I just like the idea of all this stuff is going on with the elements, the wind, and it almost looks stormy in this painting, but there's the dress. This is still hanging on that line, and but behind each painting there's a story for me, but it could be, it could evoke a completely different story for you.
Sure. Okay,
Yeah.
how about the next one?
And this one's Sisters, which I don't know. I love this piece. I sold it quite a long time ago. I'd love to see it again, but it's such a soulful piece, and just
Yes.
about two beings and in more of a serene environment, but still, the unknown, and yeah.
Yes.
And then this one is called May. This one's in the room somewhere. This is a more recent one that again is just carrying on the same sort of theme, the domestic quality of these things that we wear on our skin called clothes and the environment.
Okay, then we've got a third group here of body, and you've described these works as being explorations of exterior and interior American space, especially focused on observing human emotions within environments that are devoid of natural landscape. I think you've spoken to that a little bit, but my question would be how you think that being removed from nature affects us.
Well, I mean, it can affect different people in different ways. I don't really want to necessarily make I mean, I guess I am making a commentary on it, but it's just got to affect us. I mean, this is one, this is one piece that is an interior piece. The ones that I'll show you in a little bit speak a little bit more to that theme. But I mean, I think even now there's research being done on how children are growing up without much contact to nature. There's a book called Last Child in the Woods, I think, that's about
I've heard of it,
that
yeah.
sort of a theme. I mean, I don't know if we know for sure how it's affecting us, but I venture to guess if you don't have contact with the landscape, you don't learn to nurture it or care for it. When you're young, I think it's going to be hard for people to understand the frailty of the landscape when they're adults. And in the times that we live in right now, I think it's really important that people do understand that nature is something that we need to take care of, and with more contact with it, I think
Right.
that we may understand that a little bit better.
Okay.
This is, let me see. The first two are interiors. This is a shopping mall shot. These, actually, a lot of them have a child in it, and this is, you know, a typical American scene where we're inside a shopping mall, and the child is sort of like, "Please, when are we going to get out of here?" But it's also a, you know, visually just beautiful place, right? There's just lots of light and lots of glitter and fur coats, and this was inspired by a place in Chicago, and yeah, it's pretty interesting. And then now this is more kind of going. This is a, you know, could be anywhere, you know, could be. Costco, Walmart, you know, you name your package warehouse store, and then the figures in the painting are, and there's a figure in the background too, are the natural elements within in the piece, and you know, I think it just kind of reveals the starkness of the place. I don't know how everybody else feels. I mean, for me, when I'm parked on a hot summer day like we're going to have next week, we had this week, I want to get out of my car and into that store as fast as possible, because it is miserable. It's a miserable experience. And I remember this particular day was very hot, and, you know, just like no shade, and the glare off the pavement is, you know, it's how we live. And then inside, again, you know, we shop for expediency, and I don't want to say this is bad. I mean, I go to these places all the time. I'm just saying that, you know, that there's some soul that's been sort of taken out of the place when it's such a kind of a go in, go out, mass, huge, high ceiling, kind of noisy environment. And then again, the child within this store, you know, I've got to have these potato chips, because and again, I mean, this one I think probably most strongly speaks to that, the space, the size of the space, the kind of the heat in the painting, and then the child just, you know, in that space.
Yeah, and all the spaces are a bit overwhelming when you look at the size of the child.
Yeah, another one, you know, the green grass of the park, and or the ball field, or whatever that could be behind. And these last two, I think these are the last two in this series. There's, it's hard to see it, and if you want to look at the website, you can see these more clearly, but that is a subdivision in the background. And the children playing in the big space that is part of that.
Very
landscape.
suburban.
Very suburban. Here's another one.
Okay. All of these works are painted on panels rather than canvas. I just wondered why you choose to paint on panels.
I started painting on I do paint on canvas sometimes too, but I choose panels because I like the hardness of the material, and I do sand and scrape, and I use the.
So it gives you a good strong base for it.
It does, and then I'm able to kind of, you know, really abuse the surface without, and then get the effect that I want. There's kind of the scratchiness of the sanding that I want in the wood. I don't do a lot of sanding in my newer pieces, but I'm very used to the smooth quality of the wood now. So, you know, I do some on canvas, but it's just kind of a personal preference right now to do that.
Okay. I know bright color is an integral factor in all your paintings. Was that a conscious choice on your part? How does that affect?
Yeah, I know, it's funny. I don't know how a lot of other artists feel, but it is somewhat conscious, but it's also subconscious. You just sort of tend to drift. I mean, I think I use a lot of different colors in the paintings, but if you look at the paints that I use, I mean, from the beginning to now, it's still the same palette of paints. It's I have well, I mean, partially I've learned how to use these and mix these colors to how I want them. But also, I am looking for the one that's going to be the brightest bright next to a neutral. And so, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's totally conscious. I would say it's more subconscious, though. This just kind of drifting towards the palette. When I was doing the smaller piece, my smaller pieces are almost all bright, but the bigger ones I try and play, like the one that's still, well, like the last snow scenes that I showed you, I'm trying to play the bright against the neutral, so the brighter colors really, really stand out in a neutral environment. So especially in these last pieces where the environment, the cityscape that I showed at first is sort of dull.
I hate to interrupt you, but we are getting pretty short on time, and I want to be sure to get your heart, the newest ones, the heart ones, in here. These are paintings that you created to offer comfort and healing in a healthcare environment. Why don't we just take a look at those first, and then we can talk about the Trillium Project.
Okay, so this is in the Mills Breast Cancer Institute. And then I'm just going to show both of these here so we have time to look at them. And this one is at the Loechl Cancer Center in Lowell, Massachusetts. And both of these were inspired by the same idea. And that is, I use the birds, actually I can flip back to, inside the birds are words of people who have cancer. The words were drawn from were gathered from an Art of Healing workshop I did at Carl a few years before I did the piece. And they commissioned me to do this piece to go in the meditation room at the hospital. And the words aren't only from the people at the workshop, they're also words of a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine who passed away. She was my age. Her boy and my boy were best friends. And she really inspired me to start the whole Trillium Project, where I not only do paintings, but I create jewelry. This is one of the pieces. The Trillium Project is another website I have to raise funds for different organizations. It could be a cancer organization, using the words of cancer, people who've been affected by cancer. Or I've raised money for Larkin's Place here in town, where the mothers of kids with special needs have provided the words for me, and we did a whole jewelry pendant project to raise money for them. So, I don't know, I mean, I really feel that my creativity, I love the idea of taking it and using it in a participatory way and giving back that way with the art. And this is something I'm going to be doing a lot more in the future, too. I have some plans that are percolating. But, but yeah, these are really special projects.
That's wonderful. If you want to know more about this project, go to www.thetrilliumproject.org. Thanks for watching Art Now. Our guest has been Suzanne Keith Loechl, and you can see her art locally at the Mills Breast Cancer Institute in Urbana, Women's Health Practice, and the Springer Cultural Center in Champaign, the Women Made Gallery in Chicago, or at her website, www.suzannekeithloechl.com. We hope that you have enjoyed today's show, and we also hope it will inspire you to explore the local art scene and to make your own art now.